Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Junha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now Thursday, February 26th. It's a little past 4 p.m. I'm your co-host, John. Now, my other co-hosts today, Jungmin and Junha, did not join me today, but instead, we have today our very own NK News Data Correspondent, Anton Sokolin.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Now, Anton, you've been working at NK News for a long time, so you are obviously a known quantity. But just for our Korea Pro listeners who might not be very all that much into NK News coverage, could you explain to our listeners who you are, what you do?
My name is Anton, and I've been data correspondent here for about 3 years now. Well, my job basically involves looking at different tracking apps and marine activities. So it's like I'm checking, of course, vessels, air traffic, and pretty much all kinds of databases that mention North Korea. It includes sanctions, it includes Russian depositories, whatever registries there is. And of course, I also focus a lot on the Russia side of things and the Russian-North Korea cooperation. Recently, we've been very busy covering the Ukraine war and North Korea's participation in it. Many people didn't believe in the beginning that it would happen, but it did. And well, it gave us a lot of work. So there is a lot of developments on that front, but we are not discussing this today. We are focusing on a slightly different side of things.
Okay. Thank you for all of that. Anton, now obviously, you've been tracking, as you just said, about ships that are violating sanctions. And so you have always been looking into this sort of thing. But although you are an expert in all of that and all the fields that you cover, I'll be honest with you, the only reason why we invited you was because you are our in-house Russian. And keep in mind, by the way, that you are now going to be speaking on behalf of all 146 million Russians. So no pressure.
Great honor, at least for once, for a change, a Russian gets invited somewhere and not expelled to another country, like it happened to our fellow colleague just recently.
Exactly.
You may be aware of that situation, our listeners.
Talking about Andrei Lankov, of course, who did not have a very good time in Latvia. For that to have happened in an EU country, but we're digressing.
Right.
All right. Before we actually start digressing and talk about all sorts of different things, let's talk about, real quickly, what happened in the news the past few days. So there was something about a banner, there was something about a rally. Could you walk us through what was going on?
Well, all right. So to begin with, let's start with South Korea and its history vis-a-vis the Ukraine war, right? So it was a bumpy road. It's been a bit of a bumpy road.
Was there a history? I thought there was really none.
Well, if you remember, in the previous administration was very outspoken about the Ukraine war, about the issues about North Korea and how North Korea participated in the issues.
Sure.
There were somewhat under-delivered pledges to supply weapons to Ukraine that never materialized. And of course, that made Moscow extremely angry.
Oh, yeah.
That upset them.
We covered that on this podcast before. Vladimir Putin said a lot of different things, a lot of veiled threats against South Korea.
Right, and the Russian Foreign Ministry, of course, followed on that as well. And they just released a new set of warnings last week saying that, well, if South Korea, North Korea is just occupational hazard. So if South Korea crosses that red line and starts supplying weapons to Ukraine, even indirectly, so for example, using such mechanisms as Pearl, right, that NATO
Could
is...
you explain what Pearl is?
Pearl stands for the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, right? So it's a NATO initiative where essentially Western countries pitch in funds to buy U.S. weapons for Ukraine. So they are not directly sending their own weapons.
Now, it's not just weapons, it's also non-lethal aid, because that's what South Korea and Japan has been saying.
Right,
repeatedly.
let's clarify that, right. It encompasses different kinds of aid, but it also includes weapons. And right now, we hear reports that South Korea is reviewing whether it wants to participate or not. It is considering the provision of non-lethal aid, but the mechanism is a bit murky. We don't know exactly how it works. So it means that if South Korea pitches in certain funds, it cannot be sure that those funds exactly will be used for non-lethal aid, or maybe they're actually just gonna use that lump sum and buy weapons. So it, of course, also upset Moscow. The fact that even South Korea is considering such a situation, such a scenario, it upset them, of course, and they renewed their warnings against it. Well, it also came on the heels of the 40th anniversary of the Ukraine war, right? That was just around the corner. It was like 2 days ago, right? February 24th it is.
Right.
And around that date, the Russian embassy in Seoul hung a huge 15-meter long banner saying "Victory will be ours." And
Russia never does anything small. Go big or go home.
right, and well, here's the thing: as you can see, the message can be interpreted in a variety of ways.
But it's a very old message.
It's a very old message. I think it's pretty much every country has it. It's like, well, many countries have this slogan: "God will be, God with us," or
God be with you, or God
God-
bless America,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
whatever
So
it is.
it's in a similar kind of category of slogans. And when they, just also to clarify, they put it out like 2 weeks ago, right? So it wasn't exactly around the anniversary. It was weeks before the anniversary. And as the embassy clarified, is that, well, they had it there because they were celebrating 2 Russian holidays. One is the Diplomatic Workers Day, and the other one is the Defender of Fatherland Day, which is also a military holiday, and it falls on
Sure.
February 23rd.
Of course.
So
Just a coincidence.
just a coincidence, right? And but since the anniversary of the war was approaching, of course, everyone started paying attention to the banner because it's kind of like a sore eye right there, it's just being there, and everyone who is passing could see it. Of course, it caused a lot of controversy. People were asking, media paid attention, everyone picked it up.
Moffa
Questions
picked it up,
mounted,
of
yes,
course,
and
yeah.
Moffa picked it up, said that of course they're monitoring the situation and that they still consider that the Ukraine war is illegal. Russia is violating sanctions. North Korea is violating sanctions, and they demanded North Korea and Russia stop their military cooperation and demanded the banner be taken down. So eventually, well, as far as I know, it's actually down now. They took it down like a day after or something like that.
On the day itself, right? On February 24th.
Maybe on the day itself or the next day. I think the next day, but the next day it wasn't there already.
Yeah. And I was reading all about this. It just felt like such, if I want to borrow a phrase from Donald Trump, low energy poking each other with sticks. When Moffa told the Russian embassy, "Hey, we would like to take down that banner," it wasn't like Moffa had any authority. That's Russian territory.
Right.
That would be a violation of the Vienna Treaty or Protocol or whatever. And
Right.
so they had no authority. And the Russian embassy, they could have said, "Oh, we're going to keep this. It's our pride. This is our language. This is our holidays." At the same time, they also said, let's not cause too much trouble. This was a whole lot of noise about nothing.
Well, yes, and they released a statement. The embassy released a statement saying that they weren't meant to be offensive to anyone. And of course, they backtracked a little bit, saying that, well, this slogan's been around for ages. We didn't mean anything by it. But it also came around another notable kind of day. As we mentioned, it's all revolves around the Ukraine war anniversary, right? And this development was also centered on that. The embassy also was planning to hold a pro-war rally.
Yeah.
And
All outside with people marching. But you were there.
right. And last year, they actually did a full-on rally. They went out to their adjacent plaza. They actually had Russian flags, and in their readout on Telegram or social media, whatever platform they used, they actually said that this was exactly timed to the 3rd anniversary of the Ukraine war. Well, the special military operation, as they call it, right? And something similar was expected this year too, but against probably this mounting pressure and everything, they decided to move the meeting indoors. So at least in the confinements of their compound, embassy compound. And it's just essentially 20 people, 20 diplomats, okay, 30, with their families standing with flags, the ambassador giving a speech. The readout this time was very short, and it did not mention the war. It actually mentioned that it was only about the Defender of the Fatherland Day.
To be fair, the Bisemonji that day was horrible. It was not a good day to be outside. You and Lena were out there, and so you guys should not have been out there for as long as you guys have. The air pollution was horrible. But, okay, so this leads me to my real next question. Okay, you work on NK News, I work in Korea Pro, and because of the way that we silo things, we are essentially in our own little bubbles. We see no more beyond our little fish tanks. And so my question to you is this. how much does Russia really care about South Korea? Because whenever Russia appears in South Korean media, so Vladimir Putin or Maria Zakharova was saying this about South Korea because South Korea is saying we might send weapons, we might join Pearl or whatever it is. But does Russia really care?
Well, Korea generally, I will start, let's zoom out a little bit. I will start with that. Korea generally occupies a very important position in Russia's foreign policy. And it has been since the late 19th century when Russia established first its diplomatic presence here. So it's very important. Of course, recently, the balance has been skewed in favor of North Korea,
Sure.
clearly, right? Of course,
The Russian ambassador was very pointed about that statement.
Absolutely. And of course, they have now the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty. They have a lot of things that put them together, that they side on. And of course, the military involvement, all of that only enforces their bond. But at the same time, prior to the war, well, South Korea and Russia, they've been doing quite actually well. Their relations were, I wouldn't say that they were absolutely rosy, but they were somewhat developing. And of course, Moon Jae-in, the previous president, he visited Russia in 2018.
A lifetime ago now.
Yeah, but there was a huge economic forum. He brought lots of business people, including from Chebol, the good old days. And well, there were rumors that one of Putin's daughters is married to a Korean guy.
Really?
So there's a lot of actually context. Of course, you can also think about the speed skater Victor An that joined
Right,
Russia. So
yeah,
there's been a lot, and of course, K-pop. Even despite this war, K-pop and the Korean wave Hallyu, it never actually lost its stance in Russia. It's developing just side by side with the North Korea stuff.
That is so bizarre.
Yeah.
Please continue.
All right, so people actually in Russia do enjoy South Korean cultural content, of course, dramas, K-pop. It's very popular. But when North Korea angle came into this equation, then the focus shifted, and the age group that is involved in this was a bit different. So I would say somewhat older people, they care about North Korea more because probably it triggers certain nostalgia and certain images
Sure.
from their past.
Yeah.
So, and then when they see that this brutal Asian man charging forward, fighting for Russia essentially, well, it invokes certain feelings, right? And but when we talk about the younger generation, when they see this, I don't think it really reverberates that much in their minds. But at the same time, the cultural content that is produced in South Korea, that is something that they can get behind of, and essentially it's thriving. Yeah, that's probably this super short summary of where we are right now.
But what you were talking about was the Russian people's attitude toward the North Korea and South Korea when it comes to cultural imports or exports or whatever we want to call it. What I was specifically talking about was, does Moscow really care about what's going on in South Korea? Because I'm sure that there's looking at a lot of things going on in Ukraine, of course, in Poland, in Finland, Estonia. They're busy.
Right.
Do they really care about whether or not South Korea will join Pearl?
Well, look, these past few years, yeah, indeed, there was we can call it a winter period in the relationship. Of course,
yeah, it's frosty.
especially under the Yoon Suk-yeol government. Well, as I mentioned earlier, right, Moscow was not pleased with his actions.
Sure.
Many people weren't.
We impeached him. Not for the Russia or Ukraine
no,
thing, but yeah.
It's unrelated, but anyway. Yeah, so of course, somewhat the relationship degraded. But at the same time, South Korea, for example, recently appointed a new ambassador to Russia. And it's a known expert. Lee Sok-bae, I think his name is. He's a known expert on Russia, lived in Russia for many years,
Old
knows
Russia
Russia
hand.
in and out.
Yeah.
Absolute expert. So South Korea cares. He meets very high-level diplomats in Russia. For example, Rudenko, the vice foreign minister, who is also, it's not his official title, but unofficial, he's a Russian nuclear envoy to the Korean peninsula. They just met over Solnal, and I'm sure certain messages were delivered on how we're going to go
Sure.
forward, etc. The North Koreans were also there because they were meeting a whole bunch of
course.
Asian diplomats.
Perhaps not in the same room.
Not in the same room, but we also know that South Korean and North Korean diplomats sometimes hang out together in Moscow. I wrote an article about it a few months ago, when they were hanging out with American military attaches, Russian military attaches, and the North Korean ones, all in the same hall. At the Chinese embassy event, right?
Please tell me that they were all drinking together, because that'd be so awesome.
Well, I couldn't find a picture of them all drinking together, but I actually saw them standing together on the stage, on the same stage.
All right.
So that's already good enough, right? They were pretty close to one another.
So much for the whole Kweregun idea.
So again, getting back to the core, right? Yes, priority is absolutely given to North Korea right now. South Korea is not a strategic priority for the moment, but long-term priority, yes. And now we're getting back to the joint projects because despite the war, despite many things that happened between the two countries, there's actually a whole avenue of cooperation that
Very long
hasn't been
history.
really covered much. You covered it a little bit. The Egypt, for example, thing. We're gonna get there.
Sure.
But anyways, there is a lot of cooperation that is going on, and there are prospects for renewing this cooperation. What's more interesting is that right after this banner and rally debacle, the Russian embassy in Seoul was quick to post just like the day after post a message say on their telegrams with the ambassador's interview for the some Korean media, don't remember which one, but anyway, saying how great it would be if we cooperate actually. So
Yeah.
and that
Sure.
it caused me like it got me thinking like, wow, you really
The total whiplash.
yeah, you're
Exactly.
just well, yeah.
You alluded to all this cooperation that happened before 2022. Now, obviously, South Korea's space industry would not have existed
Right.
without Russian aid. And you will also you mentioned just briefly Egypt. You were obviously talking about the nuclear power plant in Egypt, where the KHNP, the Korean utility company, and what's the name of the Russian utility? Rosatom. you
Or
see.
Rosatom, yeah.
And these two companies are co-building this
Right.
Egyptian nuclear power plant. I'm not quite sure how that works. Apparently, it's not a violation of sanctions.
Mm.
But yeah, there's all that cooperation. But since then, business has reduced to a bare minimum.
It's true.
Sure, Korea is still importing a lot of Russian energy, just
True.
not Russian oil. And Samsung still has plants there, which is just collecting dust at the moment, I believe.
Yep.
So the reason why I'm starting with all of this is because South Korea's policy regarding Russia for the past 4 years has been about hedging. Sure, South Korea sided with the West and imposed sanctions on Russia, and that's where we're at right now. But there's also been very quiet behind the scenes trade going on.
Sure.
This whole hedging strategy that South Korea's had, has it been working? Is it dumb? Is it effective? What's your take on this?
All right, look, so basically we know that there is trade in unsanctioned sectors, like for example, foodstuffs. It never stopped. South Korea is still importing lots of seafood from Russia. That never stopped. As for those companies, again, well, actually, I just recently read this news that South Korean automobile producers, I think it's Kia or Hyundai, they were supposed to do this buyback procedure, right? So when they left the Russian market, they were given an option that you can return to the market, and buy essentially your facilities and everything back for like some symbolic sum. And they passed the deadline, so actually they gotta hurry if they want to do it, because the deadline was either January or early February, and they have to do it real fast to negotiate with Russia if they want to get back. But it's a bit complicated given the circumstance that the war is still ongoing, right? And that's the South Korean government position that, well, we are not going to do it unless the war is over. So speaking about other cooperation, so for example, cosmetics, it's been always growing in Russia. We are seeing tons of new trademark applications filed by South Korean companies, big ones. Like there's everything, pretty much everything from Olivian to, again, Kia, Hyundai. They all have Samsung, LG. There is pretty much everything. And
They're just ready to dive back into Russia as soon as the war's over.
So there's two explanations to this. They're trying to protect their logos and essentially their brand,
Intellectual property rights.
intellectual property rights, their brands from being counterfeited, or they are actually seeking to enter the market. It could be both. It
Sure.
could be that intellectual property rights protection to enter the market later. That's possible. So that's going on. That never went away. And of course, we are now looking into this big project that probably South Korean government is going to explore very soon. I hear it's supposed to start in March or April, at least this spring. The government is reviewing its first shipment of containers by vessel so from South Korea all the way to the North Pole, and it's the Northern Sea route, right, that Russia has been exploring. And there was also a cooperation between Russia and South Korea back in the day when South Korea was building icebreakers for Russia that actually crumbled after the sanctions were imposed, and Russia just essentially seized the assets and continued building those icebreakers on its own. But that's not the point. The point is that why is this Northern Sea route is important is because it essentially cuts down the delivery time by days. Dramatically. So if you want to send something to Amsterdam, and I think actually the destination this time is going to be Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And if you want to send something, it takes weeks. But if you're going over there through the North Pole, and Russia has the monopoly on the nuclear-powered icebreakers. It's
Right.
the only nation in the world that actually has a fleet of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is why also Trump is so obsessed with
Greenland.
with Greenland, because it's a strategic asset. Everything's super close around the North Pole. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
the Earth is tilted that way, so of course everything is very close. And whatever you send, it's all trackable, and you don't know what could pop up there. So South Korea is reviewing its plans to send the first batch of containers through this route. The problem is that, as far as I know, or at least the Russians are not saying anything. Yeah, there hasn't been much consultation with Russia. The Russian ambassador's article that they just recently posted explains that, well, it would be nice if South Korea and Russia somehow cooperated and talked about it. But for now, after this especially debacle, it doesn't feel like it's moving forward. At the same time, there is still a chance that suddenly there is some backdoor cooperation and behind the door cooperation, and then they will actually launch something. Again, that might run full of sanctions and the war in Ukraine, because the optics are there. But as we know, whenever there is money involved, well, optics can be skewed, because even we just recently found out that the UK is one of the staunchest supporters of Ukraine. Well, Russia actually moves funds through UK-controlled territories.
Oh, yeah.
And, well, money's money.
A lot of British banks would be very unhappy if they lost access to the Russian funds. These are all topics that we could talk about for hours upon hours, and we're already past the 20-minute mark
Damn.
here. And before we close this up, I want to bring this back down to the local level. I want to talk about you specifically. Now, I just said earlier that, yes, you are a resident Russian, and you speak for all 146 million Russians now. And yes, no pressure, once again. But before you lived in Korea, you also lived in Poland, right?
Right.
And you've been living in Korea for a long time now. You've experienced what life is like as a Russian immigrant in a Eastern European country and an East Asian country before 2022 and since 2022. So, as a Russian citizen, now, of course, your politics and other Russian people's politics are obviously not going to be the same. But as a Russian immigrant, what has your experience been like in Poland and in Korea?
So the contrast is absolutely huge. It's remarkable, honestly. So when the war broke out, the first impression I had in Poland is crowds and crowds of mostly young women, not young, but just women with young kids, teenagers, adolescents, kids, with duffel bags in the city of Krakow, where I was based. It's
Duffel bags.
Duffel bags, yeah, because they didn't bring suitcase, they used duffel bags, because that's where you put yourself. It's refugees I'm talking about from Ukraine.
Ah, I see. Got it. Okay.
Tons of them. And the sight of it is devastating.
Mm.
It is just devastating. It's very hard to, because it means that these people have to build their whole life again in a foreign land, foreign country, from scratch. Well, some of them don't speak the language. And of course, they also have their internal squabbles, because there is Ukrainian speaking Ukrainians, there's Russian speaking Ukrainians. They're all Ukrainians, but they're all suffering right now, and I need to figure out which language we're gonna speak, how we're so many things to figure out. And you being there, seeing it, well, of course it shakes you to the core, because, well, essentially, even though I don't associate the guilt, so I don't feel guilty, me personally, for
Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. I didn't do it, I didn't cause this, but of course, guilt by association, right? But you still feel somewhat responsible, because you're from there. You kind of understand their mindset. You understand the mindset of those in the Kremlin, and kind of you were raised that way, right? So you know what's up. And of course, it's devastating. When I came here, the situation was absolutely different.
Far away.
Far away. I think it's the sense of distance is different. So no more pro-Ukrainian posters on every bus stop. No more Zelensky's face everywhere.
No more people randomly accosting Russians.
True. That's true. But actually, I gotta give credit to the Polish people, because they are known to be nationalists. That's absolute truth. It's like everyone knows that. But I gotta give them credit, because to me, I never felt anything anything wrong. No one said any bad word to me. Actually, I was working back then with a bunch of Ukrainians, and imagine that it just happened. The next day we were in a meeting, right?
Right.
Oh my God.
And we're hearing reports about Bucha.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was horrible. And I was like, my first instinct was to apologize, and I kind of started, and they're like, "You've done nothing wrong. What are you apologizing for?
You're not Putin, yeah.
What's wrong with you? Carry on. That's it." And I was also kind of struck by it because, wow, even in this absolutely horrible situation, people remained objective. And wow, not many people can do that. And the Polish people are pretty much the same story. They knew that I was in Poland before it happened. I had nothing to do with it. And yeah, it was genuinely nice. But when I came here, the situation is different because it's far away. I want to say that, yeah, people care less because South Korea has more immediate concerns. It's like any other country in the world, right? Your closest neighbor is North Korea, and then there is China. And
all politics is local.
Yeah, and plus you have a strong U.S. influence here and U.S. presence here. So the priorities are different. The set of priorities are different. And of course, it feels different. Plus, I wasn't totally new to South Korea. I had lived here for 5 years before I did my bachelor's here. So it was somewhat like returning back to home, essentially second home, second home, yeah. And yeah, the contrast is absolutely striking between the two countries. But in both places, I felt pretty much like home. Poland always feels like home because the language it's so understandable to me. I picked it up very quick. And in Korea, well, years after years of living here, of course, you get adjusted, and it's nice. In any kind of difficult situation, and however stressful it is, in Poland and in Korea, I always meet people who are absolutely crazy about Russian culture, and they want to know more. Like, for example, you just keep asking me questions about Russia this whole, 30 minutes now?
Questions mostly about swear words when the cameras are not on, by the way. But I cannot have this episode end on such a heartwarming note. I gotta end this with a joke. So, as someone who speaks for all Russian people, when will this war finally end? And please give in the answer in 5 words or less.
As soon as possible.
All right, great. And there you have it. The war will end as soon as possible. I believe that this is a good time to end the episode here. Anton, do you have any final words that you want to say to our listeners?
Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to our talk, my story. It was a pleasure being here. I hope I get to be invited here once again. I don't know, maybe.
You were terrible. We'll never have you back.
Yeah, probably. Okay, I'm going to go.
Okay, and as the rest of you listeners know, you will get the Monday Week Ahead newsletter by 2 p.m. via your email. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Junho Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.